What would you do if two scared little kids walked up to you and asked for help? It was just another night shift for Officer Mark Daniels. The streets of South Ridge were quiet, unusually so. The radio buzzed occasionally, but the neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. He sat alone in his patrol car under the flickering street lamp on Roosevelt Avenue, sipping lukewarm coffee from his thermos. His eyes were tired, his heart even more so. 10 years on the force had taught him to expect the worst, even on the calmest nights. But nothing, not the academy, not the riots, not even his own tragedy, could have prepared him for what was about to happen. At 1:47 a.m., the sound of tiny footsteps tapped against the asphalt. He looked up from his notepad. Two little figures, barely visible in the dark, were approaching his car. No adults in sight. No coats. Just two small silhouettes, a boy and a girl, hand in hand, walking toward a police cruiser like it was a lifeboat. He opened his door slowly. His training told him to be alert, but his instincts told him something wasn't right, not in the usual way. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching down as the kid stopped just a few feet from him. The boy stood slightly in front of the girl, his arm protectively across her. "You lost?" Daniels asked, trying to hide the tension in his voice. The boy nodded. "Can you help us?" Daniels paused. That sentence, so simple, so human, hit him like a punch to the gut. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The boy looked about 8. Big brown eyes, too serious for his age. Torn sneakers, mismatched socks. The girl clutched a stuffed bunny in one arm and her brother's shirt with the other. She couldn't have been older than 6. "What's your name, buddy?" Daniels asked softly. "Jaden. This is my sister, Mia. Where's your mom or dad?" Jaden looked away. Mia looked up at him, waiting for his cue to speak or stay quiet. "We don't know," Jaden said finally. That was enough to raise a dozen red flags. Did something happen at home? The kids didn't answer right away. Jaden hesitated. We just needed to get out. Please don't take us back there." Daniel's stomach turned. "Get in the car," he said. "It's warm." As they slid into the back seat, Daniels radioed the station. "Dispatch, I've got 2 juveniles, unaccompanied, possible domestic situation. Bringing them in for protective custody." "Copy that," the voice crackled. "Names?" "Jaden and Mia. Ages unknown. No immediate signs of physical injury. I'll start intake paperwork once we're back." He turned off the radio and drove slowly, glancing back every few seconds. Jaden stared out the window, trying to be strong. Mia fell asleep against her brother's arm within minutes, clutching her bunny. Daniels felt a knot in his throat. His own son, Luke, would have been 10 this year. The drive to the precinct was silent except for the soft hum of the engine. Daniels pulled into the back lot, helped them out of the car, and led them inside. The night staff was already prepping 2 cots in the quiet room. One of the desk officers looked at Daniels with raised eyebrows. "Found Em walking down Roosevelt? Alone?" "Yeah," he said, jaw clenched. "No adult in sight." The intake forms asked all the usual questions: names, estimated ages, physical condition, any signs of abuse. But none of the boxes could capture what Daniels saw in their eyes: fear, fatigue, and something worse, a learned sense of distrust. Jaden was polite. Too polite. He answered every question like a grown-up trying to impress a judge. Daniels handed him a juice box from the break room. "You're not in trouble, okay? I just want to help." Jaden nodded, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar room. "Can I ask you something?" Daniels said. Jaden gave a small shrug. "Sure. Why me? Why come up to a cop car?" Jaden's answer was quiet. Miss Parker at school said, if you're ever really in danger, find a police officer. But my mom said not to. Daniels blinked. Why not? She said you take us away. Daniels didn't know what to say to that. Because she wasn't wrong. That was protocol. Protective custody. Temporary placement. The system doing what it was built to do. But looking at these two, shivering, exhausted, hearts cracked open, he didn't see a case file. He saw kids. Real kids. I'm not gonna let anything bad happen to you, he said, mostly to himself. Jaden gave the faintest nod, then turned to curl up next to his sister on the cot. She stirred, opened her eyes, and whispered, "Are we safe now?" Daniels didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a light blanket over them both and dimmed the lights. "Yeah," he said finally. "You're safe now." As he stood there watching them drift off to sleep, Daniels couldn't shake the weight in his chest. This wasn't supposed to be personal. He wasn't supposed to get attached. But something about this night was different. Something was already changing. Sunlight slanted through the high windows of the holding room the next morning. It was quiet, unusually so, save for the low hum of a vending machine and the soft rustling of blankets. Jaden opened his eyes first. He didn't sit up. He just lay still for a moment, watching the dust drift in the light. For a second, he didn't remember where he was. No yelling, no doors slamming. Just stillness. Then he saw Mia, curled up beside him like always, Bunny in her arms. She hadn't let go of that thing in months, not since their mom stopped coming home regularly. Jaden sat up carefully and looked around the unfamiliar room. One cot. Thin blankets. Bright lights and no curtains. He'd slept worse. He slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the door. It was slightly open. He peeked through and saw Officer Daniel sitting at a desk, flipping through a file, his badge clipped to his belt, uniform creased but slightly wrinkled from a long night. Jaden turned back and sat on the edge of the cot, waiting. Not nervous. Just alert, always alert. Back then, Jaden was 8, but in his mind, he was already 12. Maybe older. He'd seen too much too early. He knew how to pack a bag in 60 seconds flat, how to count out change from the bottom of a couch cushion, how to get his sister to sleep by making up songs, even if he was scared himself. Jaden was the kind of kid who didn't cry anymore, not since last year, when Mom promised to take them to the zoo and didn't come home for 3 days. But even though he stopped crying, he never stopped protecting Mia. Mia was the light in the room. Tiny, sweet, always humming under her breath, like life was a storybook she refused to put down, even when the world around her didn't match the pages. She was the kind of kid who gave names to every stuffed animal she had, even the broken ones from the free box outside the church. Mia didn't really understand everything going on. She only knew one rule. Stay close to Jaden. Their home, if you could call it that, was a third-floor apartment in a crumbling brick building off 39th Street. Water stains in the ceiling. Broken lock on the front door. The hallway always smelled like cheap smoke and fried something. The kind of place where windows were taped instead of replaced. Mom was around. Sometimes. She worked odd jobs, cleaning houses, waiting tables when she could. But mostly, she slept during the day and disappeared at night. Sometimes, she brought people back. Loud ones. Angry ones. Jaden would hide with Mia in the closet, making up bedtime stories while music blared and glass broke in the kitchen. Some nights, Mom would cry. Those were worse than the yelling. Because when she cried, Jaden didn't know how to fix it. And Mia always asked, "Why is she sad?" He never had an answer. About 2 weeks before they ended up at Officer Daniel's cruiser, things had taken a turn. A new boyfriend started coming around, Greg. He wasn't like the others. He didn't yell at first. He was quiet. Always watching. Always drinking. Jayden didn't trust him. One night, Jayden heard the slap through the wall. The next morning, Mom had a bruise under her eye and said she fell. Mia asked if they could go stay with Grandma, but Grandma was gone. Jayden remembered her funeral, even though Mom tried to pretend she was just sleeping for a while. The night they ran wasn't a plan. It was survival. Greg had been screaming, drunk and furious because they couldn't find his wallet. He threw a chair. Jayden grabbed Mia and pulled her into the hallway barefoot. He didn't wait. He didn't even think. They just ran. Down 3 flights of stairs. Across 2 blocks. Past closed stores and dim streetlights. Until they saw the police car. Jayden had never trusted cops. Not because of anything they'd done to him, but because Mom always said, "They'll take you away." She never said where. But that night, something inside him said, better anywhere than back there. Back at the precinct, Daniels stepped into the room with 2 trays, cereal, juice boxes, and a banana on each. "Morning, guys," he said, voice warm but cautious. "Thought you might be hungry." Mia sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Where's our mom?" Daniels sat down beside them. "We're looking for her, sweetheart. But right now, I just want to make sure you're okay." Jayden accepted the food but didn't start eating. Daniels noticed. "You don't like bananas?" "I'm waiting for my sister to eat first." Daniels smiled a little. "You look out for her, huh?" Jayden shrugged, but didn't look away. "She's my sister. I always will." It wasn't a declaration. It was a promise. Simple. Solid. Unbreakable. Later that morning, a woman from Child Protective Services arrived. Ms. Rivera. Business suit, clipboard, rehearsed smile. She took notes, asked questions, spoke to Daniels in hushed tones outside the room. Jayden didn't like her. Too clean, too sharp, like she was only half listening. Mia hid behind Daniels when she came in. That told him everything he needed to know. Ms. Rivera knelt beside them. "We're going to find a safe place for you two. Just for now, okay? Will we be together?" Jayden asked. "I hope so," she replied, which wasn't a yes. Daniels caught Jayden's eyes, then looked at Ms. Rivera. "They stay together," he said. "No splitting them up. Non-negotiable." Jayden noticed that. He didn't say anything. But a quiet part of him started to believe Officer Daniels wasn't like the rest. That night, as Daniels walked back to his squad car, he paused outside the holding room, watching through the glass. Jayden was telling Mia a story, something about space and stars and a ship that could take you anywhere. Mia laughed quietly. Then asked, "Do you think we'll get to go home?" Jayden didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Maybe we'll get a better one." Daniels looked away. He knew that kind of hope. The kind that came only when there was nothing left to lose. He felt something shift in his chest. He had no idea yet how far he'd go to protect them. But he already knew this wasn't just a case anymore. Before he was Officer Daniels, he was just Mark, a wiry kid with calloused hands, a chipped tooth from a bike accident, and eyes that never stopped scanning a room. Mark grew up in the system. Not the legal one, but the broken one, the foster care conveyor belt that churned through names and files faster than birthdays. He couldn't tell you the names of all the families he stayed with, but he could remember the ceilings. Every night, lying in strange beds, staring upward, trying to count the cracks in the plaster. Cracked ceilings were the only thing that stayed the same. By age 6, he'd already lived in 4 different houses. At 10, he learned how to lie just enough to avoid being transferred again. At 12, he stopped unpacking. Trust didn't come easy. Love came even harder. But what stuck with him most wasn't the absence of comfort, it was the absence of someone who chose him. No one ever chose him. Until Megan. Mark met Megan in his early 20s, after finishing the academy. She was a nurse, warm, funny, and had the kind of energy that could lift a whole room. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays and brought extra lunch just in case someone forgot theirs. She didn't just fall in love with Mark. She unraveled him. For the first time, someone saw past the uniform, the walls, the emotional armor. She asked about his past and didn't flinch when he shared the darkest parts. She even teased him for the way he folded his socks military style. "You organize like you're still living out of a backpack," she'd laugh. They got married in a fall ceremony under a grove of oaks. Nothing fancy, a barbecue, a few friends, a small dance floor. But it was real. And it was safe. Then came Luke. Luke was their world. Mark never thought he'd be the kind of dad who sang lullabies or memorized cartoon theme songs. But when Luke was born, he melted. Every rule he thought he lived by shifted. He didn't just want to protect his son, he wanted to be the father he never had. He was the kind of dad who stayed up with Luke through every fever, who clapped the loudest at every preschool recital, even when Luke forgot the words. He built forts, made pancake animals, and learned how to braid Play-Doh hair. For 5 years, they were a unit. Mark, Megan, and Luke, the life he never thought he'd have. Then one afternoon changed everything. Mark had just come off a night shift. Megan took Luke to the park to burn off energy while he caught a nap. She texted him once, "He's chasing squirrels again, chipmunk." 20 minutes later, the world caved in. A teenager, barely 17, had fired a stolen handgun during a fight with a group of other kids on the far end of the park. One bullet strayed. Luke was hit. Megan was holding him when the ambulance came. She never let go, not even when the paramedics tried. By the time Mark reached the ER, his son was gone. Grief is loud at first. People come. They bring casseroles and quiet apologies. Then, little by little, they leave. And you're left with the silence. Mark didn't go back to work for 3 months. When he did, he was a different man. Quieter. Focused, but detached. He couldn't walk past a playground without flinching. Couldn't stand the sound of a balloon popping. Couldn't say his son's name without choking on it. He and Megan tried. Therapy, space, togetherness, all of it. But sometimes grief doesn't destroy a house in one blow. It peels the paint slowly until no color is left. She moved out a year later. Mark never blamed her. So now, at 38, Officer Daniels worked the night shift in South Ridge. Not because he liked it, but because it kept him moving, kept him from remembering the weight of an empty house. He responded to calls with measured calm. He filled out reports with perfect penmanship. He did his job by the book, and locked his heart behind the badge. Until 2 kids knocked on his window. Back at the station, Daniels sat at his desk, rereading the incident report he'd written on Jaden and Mia. The wording was clinical. 2 minors found on Roosevelt Avenue at 1:47 a.m. No adult supervision. Potential domestic negligence. CPS notified. Children placed under temporary protective custody. It was correct. Factual. Cold. But it didn't tell the story. It didn't say that Jaden looked like a soldier on his last mission. Or that Mia clutched a threadbare bunny like it was the only thing tethering her to the planet. It didn't say that when Daniels looked into their eyes, he saw Luke. Not the face, not the age, but the trust. That blind, fragile trust that children give when they believe someone will catch them before they fall. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. He remembered something Luke once said, sitting on his shoulders at the zoo, pointing at a lion behind the glass. "You're my hero, Daddy. No one's braver than you." Daniels didn't feel like a hero. Not then. Not now. But maybe, just maybe, these kids needed someone to show up. Someone to choose them, like no one ever chose him. And maybe that someone could still be him. The night it all unraveled didn't start any different. Jayden had brushed Mia's teeth with her favorite watermelon-flavored toothpaste, even though there wasn't any hot water. He had warmed up a can of soup on the single working burner and split it evenly, 2 paper bowls, 2 spoons. Half for her. Half for him. Outside, sirens wailed now and then, fading into the distance like the rest of the world. Inside, the apartment felt tight. Airless. Like the walls were listening. Mom hadn't come home yet. Again. Greg had. He showed up around 10 p.m., keys jangling, the scent of alcohol entering the apartment before he even opened his mouth. He wasn't loud this time. Just slow. Quiet in that dangerous way. Jayden hated that quiet more than anything. The living room light buzzed overhead as Greg stumbled in, looking for something. "Where's your mom?" he grunted. Jayden didn't answer. He was sitting on the floor with Mia, helping her draw a picture of a house with a big backyard. No bars on the windows. A swing set. A dog. "I asked you something," Greg snapped. Jayden met his eyes, defiant but cautious. "She's not here." Greg stared at him for a long second, then started muttering to himself and tossing things. Cushions off the couch. Chairs scraped across the linoleum. His voice got sharper. "Where the hell is my wallet?" He flipped the coffee table and kicked a pile of newspapers, sending them flying. Mia jumped. Jayden instinctively pulled her behind him. "I didn't take anything," Jayden said, his voice thin but steady. Greg was shaking now. His hands curled into fists, his face blotchy red. He took one step toward them, then another. And that was it. Jayden grabbed Mia's hand, yanked her up, and bolted for the door. They didn't take jackets. They didn't take bags. Jayden just ran. Down 3 flights of concrete stairs, past flickering hallway lights, past the neighbors' doors that never opened when trouble started. Mia was barefoot. Jayden didn't stop to fix it. They hit the street and didn't look back. It was cold. Not winter yet, but cold enough to make Mia's teeth chatter. Jayden kept her hand in his, pulling her down sidewalks, past empty storefronts and overflowing trash bins. Every sound made him flinch. A car alarm in the distance. A dog barking. A garbage can tipping over. He had no idea where they were going. But he remembered something Miss Parker said in school: "If you're in danger, find a police officer. They'll help." He didn't know if she was right. But he was out of options. 10 minutes later, they saw the blue and white lights parked at the edge of Roosevelt Park. The cruiser was still. Quiet. A man sat inside, writing in a notepad, sipping from a thermos. Jayden stopped at the corner, heart pounding. He hesitated. Mom's voice echoed in his head, "Don't ever go to the cops. They'll take you away. You'll never see each other again." But then he looked at Mia, her cheeks red, nose runny, bunny dragging along the ground. She looked up at him, trusting him completely, even now. "Jay," she whispered, "I'm cold." He didn't think twice after that. They crossed the street slowly, hand in hand. Jayden squared his shoulders and approached the car. The man inside, Officer Daniels, looked up just as they stepped into the light. He opened the door. "Hey there," he said gently, already crouching down to meet their eye level. His voice didn't sound like the cops on TV. It wasn't loud or bossy. It was soft. "You lost?" he asked. Jayden nodded. "Can you help us?" Daniels looked at them, really looked, and in an instant, something in him shifted. He saw fear. Real fear. Not the kind you fake to get out of trouble. The kind that settles into your bones and makes you smaller. He saw dirt on Jaden's hands. A scrape on Mia's knee. He saw the way the boy stood in front of his sister like a shield. These kids had been through something. Daniels could feel it. He didn't ask more questions yet. He didn't flash a flashlight in their faces. He just said, "Get in the car. It's warm." Back at the precinct, Daniels helped them out of the car carefully, like they might break. He guided them into the holding room and got blankets from the supply closet. Juice boxes from the vending machine. He didn't know exactly what had happened yet, but he knew this much. Something bad enough to make a kid like Jaden run toward a cop, not away from one, had to be serious. He watched as Jaden gently wiped Mia's face with the sleeve of his shirt. Sat her down. Helped her drink. The boy wasn't just a brother. He was a protector. A parent. Daniels had never seen a kid carry so much weight in his shoulders. He stepped outside and took a deep breath. Then, for the first time in a long time, he didn't just feel like an officer. He felt responsible. That night, as the city carried on, bars closing, buses rumbling, streetlights blinking, two kids found the tiniest corner of safety inside a police station. And one man, broken by his own past, found a reason to care again. All it took was a cry in the night. Officer Daniels had been trained to ask questions, and to never accept the first answer. Trust, but verify, the academy instructor used to say, and if you can't verify, trust no one. But this wasn't a drug bust. It wasn't a traffic stop. It wasn't anything his training had prepared him for. It was two kids. Tiny, scared, and alone. And now they were sleeping in holding room B, tucked under government-issued fleece blankets, next to a vending machine that only worked if you hit it twice. Still, protocol kicked in. Daniel sat at his desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, staring at the intake report he'd started hours ago. Something about it felt wrong. Not inaccurate, just incomplete. Because he didn't want to reduce Jaden and Mia to another case file. But that's exactly what the system would do. "All right," said Sergeant Klein, stepping into the room with a clipboard tucked under his arm. "What's the story on the kids?" Daniels looked up. "Found them walking down Roosevelt. The boy says they ran away." Klein raised an eyebrow. "From what?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Any visible injuries?" "No. No bruises. No cuts. Just scared." Klein sighed, flipping through papers. "Well, scared doesn't make it abuse." Daniels shot him a look. "They were out on the street at 2 in the morning. No shoes. No supervision." "Yeah, and unless we've got a direct accusation, CPS is going to hand them right back over. If the mom shows up sober, it's her word against theirs." Daniels clenched his jaw. He knew Klein wasn't wrong. But right and wrong weren't always the same as just and unjust. "You trust your gut on this?" Klein asked casually. Daniels paused. "Yeah. I do." Klein shrugged. "Then get CPS to push for a 48-hour hold. You've got enough to justify concern, at least temporarily. But if the mom shows up before then, she's within her rights." Daniels nodded. That was the dance. Protect, but not too much. Investigate, but don't assume. Guard the law, even when the law left holes big enough for kids to fall through. Later that morning, CPS worker Maribel Rivera returned to the station. Her hair was neatly tied up, her expression unreadable, her clipboard already in hand. "I need to speak to them separately," she said to Daniels. He frowned. "Separately? They're just kids." "Exactly. And sometimes kids won't tell the truth if there's siblings in the room." Daniels didn't like it, but he stepped aside. He stayed close enough to hear pieces of both interviews through the thin office walls. Jaden's voice was quiet, almost mechanical. "Mom leaves a lot. Sometimes Greg watches us. But he gets angry. Throws things. He broke the kitchen chair. He yelled at Mia. That's why we ran. And from Mia's room, her voice even softer, he scares me. That was all Daniels needed to hear. Still, protocol demanded more. Has the mother been located? Daniels asked. Rivera sighed. Not yet. We called the listed number. No answer. We're tracking down her last known employer, but that might take time. Meanwhile, we'll initiate an emergency shelter placement for 48 hours. Daniels crossed his arms. Together. Of course, she said, as if she hadn't considered otherwise. But Daniels had seen it too many times before, siblings split across foster homes, told it was temporary, only to spend months apart. He wasn't letting that happen. Not to these two. That afternoon, while Rivera filed temporary placement paperwork, Daniels sat on the edge of the cot in holding room B, watching Jayden color quietly. Mia was asleep again, Bunny tucked under her chin like armor. Daniels cleared his throat. You did the right thing last night. Jayden didn't look up. I wasn't sure. Why not? My mom said not to talk to cops. That they'd take kids away. Daniels nodded slowly. Sometimes we do. But only if it means keeping them safe. Jayden paused, crayon hovering above the paper. She's not always bad. Sometimes she brings us donuts in the morning. Sometimes she sings to Mia before bed. Daniels heard the conflict in his voice, love and fear, loyalty and pain, all tangled together. He leaned in. It's okay to still love her. Jayden blinked hard. Are you gonna send us away? Daniels thought about that question more than he expected. Then he said quietly, I'm gonna make sure wherever you go, it's safe. That's my job. Jayden finally looked up. Will we stay together? Daniels met his gaze. I'll fight for that. That was all Jayden needed to hear. But that night, long after the forms were filed and the station quieted down again, Daniels couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Luke's face. Not because Luke looked like Jayden, they were completely different. But because both of them had that same spark, that quiet strength, the kind kids only learn when they've seen too much. He got out of bed at 2:12 a.m., drove to the station, and sat outside in the cruiser for a long while. He didn't know what he was doing. He just knew something about this case felt personal. Dangerous. Like a crossroads. Because he wasn't just Officer Daniels anymore. He was something more to these kids. And that scared him. Daniels had seen a lot during his 12 years on the force. He'd been first on the scene for everything from domestic disputes to overdoses to stolen cars abandoned in the middle of the highway. He'd broken up fights, talked down jumpers, and once delivered a baby in the back seat of a taxi. But nothing rattled him quite like the quiet of Child Protective Services. It wasn't the kids, it was the machinery of the place. The laminated posters about hope peeling off the walls. The tired smiles of the social workers. The echo in the lobby that made everything feel like a waiting room for somewhere worse. He stood in the hallway now, arms crossed, watching through a glass panel as Jayden and Mia sat in plastic chairs, side by side. They looked impossibly small against the massive intake desk. Jayden kept looking over his shoulder to make sure Daniels was still there. He didn't know why he'd come. He didn't have to be there. But the idea of just handing the kids off to a stranger with a clipboard didn't sit right. He'd promised Jayden he'd fight for them, and this, showing up, was his first swing. Maribel Rivera was back, talking with another social worker in hushed tones. She turned to Daniels. We found a temporary placement. It's a state-certified foster home outside of Midtown. Good record. 2 other children already placed there. Daniels nodded, slow. Together? For now, yes, she said. But space is tight. If a long-term placement isn't found soon, they may be reassigned separately. No, Daniels said firmly. That's not going to happen. Rivera exhaled. Mark, you're a good guy. But this isn't something you can control. The system works how it works. Daniels took a step closer. I've seen that system. I was that system. I bounced between 8 homes before I was 14. I know exactly how fast, temporary, becomes permanent. She paused, softening. You care about them. They're kids, Daniels said. They haven't done anything wrong. But the way this thing moves. It punishes kids for being unlucky. He stepped outside, letting the door close behind him. Cold air bit his face. He walked the perimeter of the building once. Twice. Every part of him wanted to do more, but every door he opened came with another rule, another chain of paperwork, another dead end that ended with a, sorry, not enough space. He didn't want Jayden and Mia to disappear into the system like he had. He knew what came next, the move to another house, the awkward introductions, the questions, the passive-aggressive resentment from a foster parent who was just doing their best. He knew about the bad nights, when no one comes if you cry, and no one checks if you eat, and no one says goodnight. He knew what it did to a kid's heart. He wasn't going to let that happen to them. Inside, Jayden watched through the window as Daniels paced in the parking lot. He's mad, Jayden whispered. Mia nodded. He's gonna leave. Jayden's throat tightened. No. I don't think so. You always say that, Mia said, her voice quiet. And she was right. He always hoped someone would stay. But they never did. Mom didn't. Grandma was gone. Teachers came and went. Social workers changed their phone numbers. Friends weren't allowed to come over after the third time Jayden showed up with a black eye. So why would this cop be any different? Still, he kept glancing out the window. Still hoping. Daniels walked back inside, his mind racing. He knew what had to be done. And he knew what it would cost him. He found Rivera filling out another form. What if, he began slowly, I became their emergency placement? She blinked, taken aback. You're not a licensed foster parent, Mark. I know. You'd need a background check, home inspection, mandatory training, and even then. I can start it today. Rivera frowned. You're not serious. I am, he said, steady. You're single. You work nights. You're a cop. You've got trauma of your own. Daniels didn't flinch. And I'm still a better option than bouncing them through strangers for the next 6 months. She studied him. You'd have to go through an expedited kinship exception request. It's rare. And there's no guarantee they'll approve it. It's a lot of hoops. I've been jumping through hoops my whole damn life, he said. One more won't kill me. By evening, Daniels had signed the initial paperwork. Jayden didn't say anything when he told them. Just stared at him, eyes wide. You mean, we'd live with you? He asked. Just until they figure something better, Daniels said. But you'll stay together. That part's not negotiable. Mia looked up from her bunny. Will there be pancakes? Daniels smiled. You like pancakes? With sprinkles. He laughed. I'll see what I can do. That night, he took them to his place, a small 2-bedroom apartment with clean floors, a working heater, and more quiet than the kids were used to. He set up a makeshift bed for Mia in the guest room, and let Jayden take the couch. Gave them both fresh towels. Left a night light on in the hall. And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, he sat in the silence, with company. Not case files. Not his grief. Real people. Real kids. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The system might say no. CPS might change its mind. Their mother might come back. The law could crush all of this by morning. But for one night, Jayden and Mia were safe. And that was enough. Jayden woke up before the sun. For a second, he forgot where he was. The soft couch cushion beneath him, the warmth of a blanket tucked around his shoulders, it all felt too calm to be real. Then he heard soft breathing from down the hall. Mia. Safe. Still here. The apartment smelled like something unfamiliar but nice, like new furniture and cinnamon. There were no roaches. No yelling from neighbors. No sudden slams of doors. Just, quiet. He sat up, feet sinking into a rug that looked way too clean to walk on, and tiptoed toward the kitchen. He found Officer Daniels already up, wearing an old NYPD hoodie and a pair of worn-in sweatpants, stirring something on the stove. "Morning," Daniels said, glancing over. "Hope you like pancakes." Jayden blinked. "You weren't joking." Daniels gave a half-smile. "About pancakes? Never." He slid a plate onto the counter, 3 pancakes stacked high, sprinkles cooked into the batter, and a single strip of turkey bacon on the side. Jayden didn't touch it at first. He just stared at it like it was too good to be real. Mia shuffled in a few minutes later, bunny in one hand, hair in full chaos. She climbed into the chair next to her brother and yawned. "Pancakes," she mumbled. "With sprinkles," Daniels said, setting down another plate in front of her. "Special request." She giggled, an actual giggle, and dug in like it was Christmas morning. Daniels leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. He didn't say much. He just watched. Jayden noticed. Every time he looked up, Daniels was there. Calm. Present. Not hovering, but there. Not checking his phone. Not rushing out the door. Just, paying attention. Jayden didn't quite know what to make of it. After breakfast, Daniels showed them around the apartment. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a closet with towels. He opened every cabinet, every door. "No secrets here," he said. "You can ask me anything. You can open anything. And the bathroom's all yours, unless you're in there for 20 minutes like Mia this morning." Jayden smirked. "She plays spa." "I do not." Mia shouted from the hallway. Daniels chuckled. "She absolutely does." There was something about the way he teased them, light, respectful, that made it feel okay. Not like a grown-up trying too hard, but like a person. A real one. Still, the air was fragile. Jayden kept checking the front door, like someone might barge in at any second and drag them out. Mia stayed close to her bunny and closer to Jayden. They didn't unpack their things, not that they had much. Daniels noticed. After lunch, he sat across from Jayden at the kitchen table, watching him draw. "You like to sketch?" he asked. Jayden nodded. "Helps me think." Daniels leaned over. "What's that one?" "A safe house," Jayden said. "With a fence. And a dog. And a camera on the porch. Just in case." Daniels swallowed hard. "That's a good idea. Got a name for the dog?" Jayden paused. "I don't know. Maybe Tank. So people are scared of him." Daniels chuckled. "Smart. You build from protection first." Jayden looked up, a flicker of pride crossing his face. "Yeah." That night, after spaghetti and one cautious round of board games, Jayden crushed Daniels in Connect 4, while Mia mostly rearranged the pieces. Daniels tucked Mia into bed. "Can you leave the hall light on?" she whispered. "Already did." She clutched Bunny tight. "Will you be here in the morning?" Daniels sat beside her. "Yeah, kiddo. I will." "Promise?" He hesitated. Not because he didn't mean it, but because he knew promises, to kids like this, were sacred. They weren't just words. Still, he nodded. I promise. Out in the living room, Jayden was already curled up on the couch again, arms crossed. Daniels leaned on the doorframe. You know you can take the bed, right? The guest room's yours. Jayden shook his head. I'm good here. Daniels stepped inside. I get it. Strange place. New routine. Jayden didn't respond. Daniels crouched down. You want to know how I know you're brave? Jayden gave him a side eye. 'Cause I ran away. No, Daniels said. Because you stayed. Jayden blinked. You could have taken off again once CPS stepped in. You could have said no. But you stayed here. With your sister. That's real bravery, Jayden. Jayden looked down at his hands. I just didn't want her to be alone. Daniels nodded. Neither did I. They sat in silence a moment longer. Then Daniels stood. I'll leave the light on out here too, just in case. Jayden said nothing, but for the first time, he unfolded his arms and laid his head back. That night, after both kids were finally asleep, Daniels sat at the kitchen table, the apartment completely still. He looked around. Half-drunk juice boxes. A drawing of a house with a camera on the porch. A pancake pan still in the sink. A pink bunny sitting upright on the couch. The mess of family. Of something real. He wasn't their dad. He wasn't even sure he was their foster guardian yet, legally speaking. But for now, just for tonight, they had pancakes, nightlights, and someone to fight for them. And that? That was home. For now. The call came just after noon. Daniels was at the precinct, finishing a shift that had started at 6 a.m. He'd barely slept, not from work, but from wondering what would happen if the system flipped the script on him. When his phone buzzed and he saw CPS, Rivera on the screen, he already knew it wasn't good. He stepped into the hallway, heart thudding. Rivera, he answered. She's back, Rivera said without preamble. Daniels gripped the phone tighter. The mother? Yeah. She showed up at a detox center this morning and checked herself in. We verified ID and ran the usual. No outstanding warrants. No immediate signs of abuse. No formal charges ever filed. Daniels exhaled. That doesn't mean the kids are safe. I'm not saying they are. I'm saying we're at a legal crossroads. Daniels stared out the window at the rain streaking down his cruiser. What's she asking for? She wants them back. She's petitioning for immediate reunification based on voluntary rehab entry and parental rights. Daniels clenched his jaw. You've seen what they ran from. I have. And so have you. But without a criminal record or documented abuse, the courts tend to lean toward reunification, especially if the parent is taking corrective action. That's the language they use. He closed his eyes. She wants to meet them, Rivera added. Today. Daniels drove back to his apartment in silence. Every traffic light felt longer. Every car horn sharper. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He wasn't mad that their mom wanted to come back. He was mad that the system was already considering it. After 4 nights of peace, pancakes, board games, and actual laughter, the thought of tearing Jayden and Mia away made his chest tighten. He couldn't protect them from this. Not unless he broke the rules. And he wasn't that kind of cop. Not anymore. When he walked through the front door, Mia was drawing on the living room floor while Jayden flipped through a book on military airplanes. They both looked up. Jayden knew right away. You talked to her, didn't you? He asked. Daniels nodded. CPS called. Your mom checked herself into a program. Jayden's expression didn't change, not right away. He just stared. Then slowly, his eyes shifted downward. She wants us back, he asked flatly. She's asked to see you. It's just a meeting for now. Mia stood, Bunny clenched in her fist. We're going back. Daniels knelt down so he was eye level with her. No one's going anywhere right now, okay? But they do want to have a talk. In a public place. Safe. Supervised. Jayden shook his head. What if she lies? Daniels stayed quiet. What if she says all the right stuff just so they let her take us and then, his voice cracked. Then it goes back to how it was? I'll be there, Daniels said gently. I promise. Jayden looked up, his eyes full of something between anger and betrayal. You can't promise that. Daniels didn't answer. Because Jayden was right. The meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. at a monitored visitation center 2 miles from Daniels' apartment. A sterile building with flickering lights, linoleum floors, and folding chairs that scraped across the tile like fingernails on glass. Jayden and Mia waited in the corner, side by side on a too small bench. Daniels stood nearby, his badge tucked out of sight. The door opened at 4:17. Their mother stepped in. She looked different. Her hair was pulled back, skin pale, and her eyes, once filled with a certain wild energy, now just looked tired. She wore a wrinkled hoodie and too thin jeans, and she clutched a plastic hospital bracelet like it was a security blanket. Mia, she breathed. Mia looked up, unsure. She didn't run into her mother's arms like in the movies. She just whispered, "Hi." Their mother knelt down, arms open, and slowly, almost nervously, Mia walked into them. Jayden didn't move. I've been looking for you, their mom said, tears welling up. I've missed you so much. Jayden finally spoke. We missed you too. For a long time. Before you started disappearing. She looked at him, her eyes wet. I know. I was sick. You were drunk. I was hurting. Jayden's jaw tightened. So were we. The visit lasted 20 minutes. Their mom tried to hold both their hands. She cried. She apologized. She told them things would be different. Daniels didn't interrupt. He stood silently in the background, watching. Every second, he measured truth from performance. Regret from manipulation. But some part of him believed her. At least a little. She did look like someone who had crashed hard and was now standing in the rubble trying to rebuild. But he knew that wasn't always enough. A crash doesn't erase the wreckage. When the meeting ended, Rivera met them outside. She's petitioning for monitored custody while in rehab, she explained. Supervised nights. Split care with her sponsor. Daniel's blood ran cold. You're kidding. I'm not. The judge will make a call by Friday. And if it goes through, she could start visitation by next week. Jayden stood nearby, his arms crossed again, the way he had the first night. Mia didn't say anything. She just held on to Bunny like it was all she had. Daniels crouched beside them both. I told you I'd fight for you, he said quietly. I'm still fighting. But sometimes we don't win every round. Sometimes we just hang on until the next one. Jayden nodded once, eyes hard. Mia whispered, do we have to go back? Daniels looked them both in the eye. Not if I can help it. The quiet of the apartment felt more suffocating than comforting now. It was a thin veil over a storm that had been brewing ever since he'd brought Jayden and Mia here. Daniels paced the living room, checking his watch every few minutes. He couldn't help it. His thoughts kept spiraling back to that conversation with Rivera earlier, the looming court date, and the question that lingered in the air, one he wasn't sure he could answer for himself: should he fight harder, or step back? A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He wasn't surprised when he opened it to find his old partner, Detective Lucy Torres, standing there, hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "Mind if I come in?" "Yeah, sure," Daniel said, stepping aside to let her in. He could already sense the weight behind her visit. She'd been with him through some of the roughest cases, and if anyone knew how deep this one cut, it was Lucy. She sat on the couch, eyes scanning the living room, as if looking for something that wasn't there. Her gaze landed on the kids' drawings taped to the wall, the colorful scribbles of houses, flowers, and stick-figure families. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Daniel sat across from her, rubbing his hand across his face. "I'm messing this up, Luce. I can feel it." "Messing what up?" Lucy asked, cocking her head. "You're doing the right thing." Daniel shook his head. "I don't know anymore. Jaden and Mia, I'm all they've got right now. They're still not settled, not fully safe. And now their mom is back, asking for them. I don't know if she's really changed. I don't know if I can trust her." Lucy sighed, leaning forward. "You know, I've seen a lot of kids in and out of the system, but these two. They've got a good chance with you. That much is clear." Daniels gripped the armrest. "I wasn't supposed to get attached." "You didn't plan on it," Lucy said softly, her voice laced with understanding. "But here's the thing, no one's asking you to be their dad. But you can be their protector. You're their stability right now. No one else is." Daniel swallowed. The words hit harder than he expected. He had always known what he was doing wasn't exactly legal, not in a traditional sense. He wasn't their guardian, he hadn't gone through the foster system, and legally speaking, he was just a cop taking care of two kids for a while. But protecting them, that was something he could do. He glanced over at the kids' room, where Mia was lying on her bed with Bunny and Jaden was perched on the edge of the couch, reading a book. They were trying to act normal, but Daniels knew better. They were both still on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I've been in the system too," Daniels muttered, more to himself than to Lucy. Lucy's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Daniels let out a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. "I've told you bits and pieces, but I've never really said it all. About growing up. My mom wasn't, well, she wasn't great. I spent a lot of time in foster homes. Some were decent, some were horrible. But none of them were real. You know." Lucy's eyes softened. She knew exactly what he meant. "The thing is, I was the kid who always tried to be good. Always tried to fit in, to make sure I didn't rock the boat. I never wanted to be the problem. But eventually, I just got too tired to pretend that I was okay." He paused, memories flooding in. Of late-night calls from social workers, of eating dinner in places where he didn't know anyone, of long days trying to hold on to pieces of himself that felt like they were slipping through his fingers. "I was 11 when I was finally placed in a foster home that stuck. But by then, I was already jaded. I didn't trust anyone anymore." Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. "So, what's the hardest part about this for you? The fact that it could all come crashing down, or?" Daniels didn't hesitate. "The hardest part? It's that I know what it feels like. To think you're safe. To think someone's got your back. To believe that finally, maybe, this is it. And then to find out you were wrong. That everything you've built was just a lie." Lucy nodded, her eyes dark. "Yeah. I get that." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft murmur of the kids' voices in the background. The weight of the past, of all those years spent trying to survive, hovered between them. But Daniels felt something shift. Maybe it was the way Lucy understood without needing to say anything more. Maybe it was the way talking about it didn't make him feel weaker, but stronger. Finally, Daniels spoke again. "I can't let that happen to them. I can't let them go back to that." Lucy looked at him, her eyes full of quiet support. "You're not alone in this, Daniels. You know that, right? He nodded slowly. I don't know how to stop it. But I'm not giving up on them. Not now. Not ever. The next few days felt like a blur. Daniels spent every moment researching, calling in favors, and figuring out how to keep the kids safe. But it wasn't just about the paperwork or the meetings with lawyers. It was about the kids, Jaden and Mia, and how they had already begun to trust him. That trust, he wasn't about to break it. He couldn't. Not after everything he'd been through himself. That night, after dinner, as he tucked Mia in again, she turned to him, her small hands clutching Bunny tightly. Are we going to be okay? She asked, her voice so quiet it barely reached his ears. Daniels smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. Yeah. We're going to be okay. I promise. But the truth was, he wasn't sure. The court date was coming. The mother would try for custody. And Daniels was going to fight every step of the way. Because this time, he wasn't just trying to protect two kids. He was trying to protect a future. And he wasn't going to let that slip away. The court date arrived too quickly. Daniels had barely slept the night before, pacing around his apartment, running through every piece of evidence, every piece of testimony. His thoughts were a jumble of legal jargon and gut feelings, a cocktail of doubt and determination. The morning felt cold as he grabbed his jacket, checked on the kids, still asleep, as if the world wasn't about to shift beneath their feet, and headed out to the courthouse. His car ride was a blur of stop-and-go traffic, the world around him moving in a kind of slow motion. When he arrived, he stood outside the building, staring up at the intimidating structure, the tall pillars that seemed to remind him of the weight of the system. For so long, he'd believed in it, trusted it to do what was right. But today, standing in front of the courthouse, he wasn't sure anymore. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. CPS, Rivera, the judge is about to take the stand. I'll be there. Daniels ran a hand through his hair, took a deep breath, and walked into the courthouse. Inside, the courtroom was filled with people. There was a tangible sense of tension in the air. The judge, an older man with a stern face, presided over the room with the air of someone who had seen it all before. Daniels took his seat near the back, eyes scanning the room for any signs of what might happen next. The mother, Michelle, sat at the opposite table, her eyes wide and slightly nervous. She was dressed in a formal blouse and skirt, her hair pulled into a tight bun. The look on her face was a mix of desperation and hope, but Daniels saw through it. She was playing the game, but he wasn't sure she understood the stakes. Beside Michelle sat her lawyer, a slick-looking man with a too-sharp suit, whispering into her ear. He shot Daniels a quick glance, then turned back to his client. The kids weren't there yet. Daniels had insisted they not attend the hearing, not yet, not until it was absolutely necessary. He couldn't risk them seeing the legal battle unfold, couldn't let them feel the stress that the adults were about to unleash on their lives. His attention snapped back to the front as the judge banged his gavel. Court is now in session. We are here today to hear the petition filed by the mother, Michelle Woods, for reunification with her children, Jaden and Mia Woods. Mr. Daniels, you have been called as a witness in this matter. Daniels' stomach churned. It was finally time. He stood up, straightening his uniform, and made his way to the witness stand. The prosecutor began by asking him simple questions: how long he'd known the kids, how their mother had left them, and what kind of care he'd provided. Daniels answered each question clearly, with the conviction of someone who had seen these kids grow from scared, confused strangers to the kids who now relied on him. He explained how Jaden had slowly opened up, how Mia had clung to him as if he were the only constant in her life. The questions came easy, but the moments between the questions, the silence in the courtroom, the eyes of the judge on him, were much harder to endure. The defense attorney, the mother's lawyer, stood next, a cocky grin playing on his face as he approached Daniels. He cleared his throat, as if ready to break him down. Officer Daniels, you've been fostering these children for how long? the lawyer asked, his tone dripping with false politeness. Daniels straightened, steadying his nerves. For almost 3 weeks now. And in that time, the lawyer continued, you've come to think of yourself as their primary guardian, haven't you? I've provided temporary care, Daniels answered firmly. Their mother's absence left them in a position where they needed stability. I've tried to offer that. The lawyer smirked, glancing at the judge. But you've grown attached, haven't you? You're emotionally invested in keeping these children. Is that not true? Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. I care about these kids, yes. But that doesn't change the facts. They need safety, they need security. If their mother is truly ready to provide that, then I'm all for it. But I have doubts. And why would you have doubts? The lawyer pressed. Daniels locked eyes with him. Because I've seen what happens when someone promises change but hasn't actually made it. There was a beat of silence. The lawyer tried another tack, his voice suddenly softer. You've seen children come and go, haven't you? Children who were hurt by the very system you've put your trust in. You've seen parents get their children back only to disappoint them again. Daniels stiffened. He didn't respond right away, but the weight of those words stung. The truth was, he had seen it. He had lived it. He knew how fragile things could be, how easy it was for someone to slip back into old habits. The lawyer leaned in. Are you telling us that you don't think this woman deserves another chance? The question hung in the air. Daniels didn't have a simple answer. He wanted to say no, wanted to tell the court that Michelle wasn't ready, that she would fail them again. But his mind flickered back to the meeting at the visitation center, to the way Michelle had cried, the way she had looked at her children with such deep regret. I'm saying that these kids deserve to be safe, Daniels replied, his voice steady. I don't know if their mother is truly ready. I don't know if she has it in her to change. But if she does, and if she can prove it, then maybe she deserves that chance. But until then, they belong where they're safe. There was a long pause as the lawyer backed off, glancing toward the judge. The weight of Daniel's words seemed to settle in the room. The judge leaned forward, his gaze sharp. Thank you, Officer Daniels. You may step down. Daniels nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he stepped away from the stand. His heart pounded, but he knew there was nothing more he could say. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, but Daniels could only focus on one thing, the kids. He had done what he could. Now it was out of his hands. By the time he left the courtroom, the sky had turned a deep shade of gray. The case wasn't over, but the first round was done. Daniels walked to his car, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. The fight wasn't finished, not by a long shot, but for now, he had done what he could to keep them safe. He had to believe it was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed the court hearing felt like a slow-motion blur. Daniels couldn't escape the weight of uncertainty that hung over him. Every moment was filled with questions that didn't have answers. He'd done everything he could, but now it was in the hands of the judge, and there was no way to predict how it would go. Jaden and Mia had been unusually quiet, even for them. Mia spent more time curled up with Bunny, her stuffed animal, clutching it tightly as if the small toy could somehow shield her from the storm brewing outside their little bubble. Jaden, usually a little more expressive, was withdrawn. He kept his eyes glued to the window, watching the world outside, but Daniels knew he wasn't really seeing it. That morning, Daniels sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, scrolling through the endless emails that seemed to flood his inbox. But his mind wasn't on the case. It wasn't on work, either. It was on the 2 kids sleeping just down the hall, the kids who had no idea what was coming. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He knew who it was even before he stood up to answer it. Rivera, he said as he opened the door. The social worker stood there, holding a file under her arm, her expression serious. "I just got the word from the judge," she said, stepping inside. "We're having a meeting in an hour to discuss his ruling." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He swallowed, trying to keep his composure. "And?" Rivera looked at him, her eyes soft but firm. "It's not good, Daniels. I'm afraid the judge is going to rule in Michelle's favor." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't wanted to believe it, hadn't wanted to admit that it was a possibility. He had prepared himself for the worst, sure, but hearing it from Rivera, made it feel too real. "I don't understand," Daniels muttered, his grip tightening around the coffee mug. "We proved she's not ready. She hasn't done enough to prove she's stable." "I know," Rivera said, taking a seat at the table. "But the judge is looking at this from a legal perspective, not an emotional one. The law is about reunification, about giving families a chance to heal. Michelle has been clean for the last 6 months. She's completed the required programs. The judge is going to give her a chance." Daniels felt the room tilt. His thoughts were all over the place. He had done everything right. He had fought for these kids. And now it seemed like it might all be slipping away. "But what about them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What about Jayden and Mia? They've been through hell. They've been hurt. They need stability. They need me." "I get it, Daniels," Rivera replied, her voice softening. "I do. But the law isn't always about what's best for the kids in the moment. It's about reunification, about trying to give families a second chance, even when it's hard." Daniels clenched his fists. He wasn't sure if he was angry or heartbroken. Maybe a little of both. The kids had already been through so much. They'd been pulled from their home, tossed into foster care, shuffled between strangers, and now they had found something resembling peace with him. To take that away felt wrong. "I'm not going to let her take them," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I'm not. If the judge rules in her favor, I'll fight it. I'll do whatever it takes." Rivera sighed, clearly conflicted. "I wish I could say I didn't understand how you feel. But you have to be prepared for the worst, Daniels. We can't fight the law. Not like this." Daniels stood up abruptly, pacing the room. He knew Rivera was right. The judge's decision was final, for now. And there was only so much he could do. But he couldn't just give up. Not after everything he'd seen, not after seeing how Jayden and Mia had come to rely on him. He glanced at the clock. The meeting was in 30 minutes. His heart was racing, his palms sweating. He didn't have the luxury of time to think about what was going to happen next. He had to be strong, for the kids. The meeting was a blur of legal terms, calm voices, and tense silences. The judge's decision had already been made, but the formalities of the process had to play out. Daniels could barely focus on the conversation happening around him. His eyes kept drifting back to Jayden and Mia, who were sitting in a corner of the room with a social worker, looking so small and out of place. Finally, the judge spoke. "The ruling is as follows: the children, Jayden and Mia Woods, are to be reunified with their mother, Michelle Woods, effective immediately. Officer Daniels, while your care has been commendable, the court finds that Michelle has made the necessary steps toward stability. We are granting her full custody." The words stung like a slap in the face. Daniels felt the air in the room grow thick, suffocating. He barely heard the rest of the judge's words. He could see Michelle's face light up, but it didn't bring him any comfort. Not when he knew what that meant for the kids. He turned toward the children, who were now looking up at him with wide eyes, unsure of what to make of the situation. Mia, holding Bunny tightly, looked at Daniels, her expression full of hope and fear. "Are we going home now?" she asked in a small voice. Daniels didn't have the heart to answer. He knew what he wanted to say, to tell her that they were going to be okay, that he would never let her go, but the words felt empty now. He had lost. He swallowed hard, forcing a smile onto his face. "We're going to figure this out, Mia," he said, his voice cracking despite his best effort. The social worker came forward, her expression unreadable. "We're taking them back to their mother now," she said gently. Daniels stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He was supposed to protect them. He had failed. But as the social worker took Mia's hand, and Jayden stood beside her, looking up at Daniels with a gaze that seemed to ask for reassurance he didn't know how to give, Daniels realized something. Maybe he hadn't lost everything yet. There was still time to fight for them. And he wasn't done yet. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Daniel's eyes were fixed on the road, but his mind was far from the endless stretches of asphalt. He had lost, that was clear. But it wasn't just a legal loss, it felt personal, like a defeat that went deeper than he could admit. The kids weren't with him. That part was the hardest to stomach. After the ruling, he'd watched as the social worker led Mia and Jayden out of the courtroom. Mia, clutching Bunny so tightly her knuckles had gone white, didn't look up at him. Jayden, usually so full of energy, had his head down, shoulders hunched, as though he were trying to shrink into himself. Daniels couldn't help but feel a pang in his chest. They had found something in him they hadn't found in anyone else, trust, maybe, or security. And now, just as quickly, they were being taken from him. He wondered if they understood why it was happening or if they simply saw him as another adult who had let them down. The car rolled to a stop at a red light, and Daniels gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he could fight it, maybe he could prove Michelle wasn't ready, maybe. But nothing seemed to make sense. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He grabbed it, briefly glancing at the screen. CPS, Rivera, I know how you feel right now, Daniels. But I think you need to hear this, Michelle's been given a chance. But this is far from over. If things don't work out, we can revisit the case. You're not out of options. Daniels couldn't bring himself to respond right away. He had fought so hard, and now all he had were questions, what ifs, that circled in his mind like vultures. He tossed the phone into the passenger seat with a frustrated sigh. The light turned green, and the car lurched forward. It wasn't over, Rivera had said. But Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that, for him, it had been. When he finally got home, the apartment felt empty. Too empty. The silence that used to be a comforting presence now weighed heavily on him. There was no Mia humming softly to herself, no Jayden kicking a ball across the room, no sounds of small feet running down the hall. He sat down at the kitchen table, still in his uniform, his thoughts drifting like fog. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, but food didn't seem to matter right now. The kid's absence felt like a physical ache. He tried to shake off the feeling of loss, but it clung to him, the heavy weight of knowing they were no longer under his roof. The knock at the door broke his reverie. He stood up quickly, not sure what to expect. Rivera was standing there, a slight frown on her face, but her eyes were full of understanding. "You okay?" she asked, stepping inside when he gestured for her to. Daniels let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. "I'm fine. I don't know. It doesn't feel right, Rivera. It doesn't feel like it's over." She took a seat at the table, looking at him with a mix of sympathy and something else. "I get it. Believe me, I do. You've been through a lot with these kids. And I know you care about them." "I don't just care," Daniels said, his voice cracking. "They've been through hell. They were just starting to heal, starting to trust, and now, it's like it's all been ripped away." "I know," Rivera said softly. "But this is part of the process. Sometimes we don't get the answers we want, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the road." Daniels sat down across from her, his eyes still fixed on nothing in particular. "You said we can revisit the case if things don't work out, right?" Rivera nodded. That's right. We can reassess. The road isn't closed yet. Michelle has a long way to go, and if she doesn't follow through, if she slips up again, we'll be there to pick up the pieces. But for now, the law says she gets her chance. Daniels leaned back in his chair, his mind processing her words. A long way to go. That was the part he could hold on to. He wasn't out of options. Not yet. It was painful, but he had to be patient. He had to trust that there would be a moment when things would fall apart for Michelle again, when the system would finally see what he had seen all along. She's not ready, Daniels muttered. She's never been ready. Rivera didn't answer right away. She sat there for a long time, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table. Finally, she spoke. You may be right, she said quietly. But sometimes, it's not about us being right. It's about giving people the chance to prove themselves. And if she does fail, we'll be ready. You'll be ready. Daniel stared at her, trying to hold on to that faint hope. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was still a way forward. But right now, it felt like the system was failing them, failing him, failing Jayden and Mia. I'm not giving up on them, Daniels said finally, his voice hardening. If Michelle messes up again, I'll be right there to fight for them. They deserve better. I'll make sure they get it. Rivera smiled faintly. I believe you, Daniels. I really do. But you have to remember, this is a marathon. Not a sprint. The drive to Michelle's apartment felt like the longest of his life. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He could only imagine what Mia and Jayden were going through, stuck in a home that wasn't ready for them, with a mother who couldn't keep it together. When he arrived at the apartment complex, Rivera was already there, standing near the entrance. Her face was tight with worry, her arms crossed over her chest. What's going on? Daniels asked as he approached her. She relapsed, Rivera explained, her voice heavy with the weight of the news. I don't have all the details, but from what I've gathered, she was using again. The neighbors heard yelling, and one of them called it in. Daniels clenched his jaw. He could feel the rage building inside him. He had known it would happen. He had known Michelle wouldn't be able to handle the pressure. But what about the kids? What had they seen? What had they heard? We need to get inside, Daniels said, already walking toward the door. Are the kids okay? Rivera's face tightened, but she didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know, Daniels. I'm hoping we can get them out of there before it gets worse. They were inside the apartment within minutes, and the scene that greeted them wasn't what Daniels expected. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Mia and Jayden sat on the couch, staring at the television. They didn't even look up when Daniels and Rivera entered. But something in the stillness of their posture told Daniels that they were far from okay. Mia still clutched Bunny, but her small hands trembled slightly as she hugged the toy close to her chest. Jayden had his knees pulled to his chest, his head down, and his body tense, like he was bracing for something. Hey, guys, Daniels said softly, crouching in front of them. How are you doing? Jayden barely looked at him. Mia, on the other hand, met his gaze with wide, uncertain eyes. Are we going back? Mia asked, her voice small. Daniel's heart shattered. He knew she didn't understand fully, not yet. But she was asking because, deep down, she knew the same thing he did, something was wrong here. Daniels forced a reassuring smile onto his face, though it felt forced and empty. We're just making sure you're safe, Mia. You're okay. You're both okay. Michelle's voice echoed from the other room, slurred and frantic, though Daniels couldn't make out the words. He turned to Rivera. I'll go check on her, Rivera said, heading toward the source of the commotion. Daniels stayed by the kids. They needed him now more than ever. Mia finally spoke again, her voice a little shaky. Mom's sick. Isn't she? Daniels couldn't answer right away. He didn't want to lie, but the truth was too complicated for a child to understand. Instead, he simply nodded. Yes, sweetie. But that's why we're here. To make sure you're safe. Jayden, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. His voice was a low murmur. Are we going back to her? Daniels paused. He wanted to say no, to say that they would stay with him, that everything would be okay. But the truth was, he didn't know. It wasn't up to him yet. I don't know, Jayden, he said quietly, his voice full of regret. But I promise you this, whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be here for you. Mia looked at him, her expression filled with an emotion Daniels couldn't quite place. Hope, fear, maybe both. But one thing was clear, she trusted him. And that trust was something he wouldn't let go of. Rivera returned a few minutes later, her face grim. She's passed out on the floor. I don't think she's been able to keep it together for a while now. We'll need to get the kids out of here. Daniels nodded, his heart sinking. This was it, the breaking point. He could see the cracks in Michelle's facade, and now there was no denying it. The kids deserved better. He couldn't let them go back to that. We're taking them, Daniels said firmly. I'm filing for emergency custody. I can't let them go back to her. Rivera looked at him, her eyes full of concern but also something else, agreement. You know this won't be easy. It's going to be a fight. I don't care, Daniels replied, his voice steady. I'm done waiting. They've been through too much. They deserve more than this. As Daniels led Mia and Jayden out of the apartment, he couldn't help but feel a wave of both relief and determination. The battle wasn't over. But maybe, just maybe, this was the chance he'd been waiting for. He wasn't going to let them slip through his fingers again. The weight of the decision sat heavily on Daniel's shoulders. As he sat in his car, staring at the courthouse in front of him, his thoughts swirled like a storm. He had known the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but now that he was at the starting line, it felt more daunting than ever. Mia and Jayden were in the back seat, both quiet, their faces drawn with a heaviness beyond their years. Mia had been clutching Bunny so tightly it seemed like the toy might be the only thing keeping her grounded. Jayden was staring out the window, lost in his thoughts. Daniels took a deep breath and looked in the rearview mirror. He saw the faces of the two kids, faces he promised to protect, no matter what. We're almost there, he said, his voice calm but with an edge of resolve. We're going to make sure you're safe, okay? You're not going anywhere without me. Jayden didn't respond, but Mia gave him a small, tentative nod. Daniels knew that this wasn't just about the legal battle, it was about trust. They were trusting him to follow through, to be the steady hand in their storm. It was a responsibility he couldn't take lightly. Inside the courthouse, Daniels met with his lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Marissa Fields, who had been recommended by a friend at the precinct. She had dealt with child welfare cases before and had an unshakable focus that Daniels appreciated more than he could express. We're filing for emergency custody today, Marissa said, her tone businesslike as she laid out the documents in front of Daniels. We've got a solid case. Michelle's relapse is our leverage. The court is going to have to take that into account. Daniels nodded, but there was a knot in his stomach. Michelle had failed them. But he hated the thought of using her struggle against her. She's their mother, he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. I don't want to see her fail, but I can't sit back and let the kid suffer. Marissa met his gaze and placed a hand on his arm. You're not here to punish Michelle. You're here to protect Mia and Jayden. The court will see it that way. But we have to show them that the kids are better off with you. Daniels nodded, though the weight of her words settled heavily on his chest. Protecting them wasn't just about getting custody. It was about proving he could be the father figure they needed, the stability they'd never had. The courtroom was a stark, cold room filled with the hum of anticipation. Daniels sat at one of the tables, his palms sweaty, his legs stiff. He had never been in a courtroom like this before. The stakes felt higher than anything he'd ever faced in his career. This wasn't a case of crime and punishment, this was a fight for the future of two children. Mia and Jayden were with him in the courtroom, sitting quietly beside him. They seemed oddly calm, but Daniels could feel the tension in their small bodies. Every so often, Jayden would glance up at him, his eyes filled with questions that Daniels didn't have answers for. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Nelson was an older woman, her expression stern but not unkind. She surveyed the room before sitting down, and the proceedings began. Daniels felt like time had stopped as he listened to the opening statements. Your Honor, Marissa began, we are here today to request emergency custody of Mia and Jayden. Their mother, Michelle Brown, has been unable to maintain a stable environment for them. The recent relapse and reports of neglect are concerning. Daniels felt his throat tighten. He hadn't heard the details of Michelle's relapse until now, and hearing them out loud made it more real than he was ready for. On the other side of the courtroom, Michelle sat in a chair, her head down. She had a look of defeat about her, and Daniels couldn't decide whether it made him feel sorry for her or angry at her. She had had every chance to make things right, and yet, here they were. The judge nodded and then turned her attention to the next person. We understand the request for emergency custody, the opposing attorney said, his voice smooth but laced with tension. However, Michelle Brown has shown significant progress in her recovery. She has completed a rehabilitation program and is now in outpatient therapy. She is capable of providing a safe environment for her children. The word stung. Progress? Daniels thought. Michelle had relapsed just days ago. How could anyone call that progress? I understand your point, but the children are in immediate danger, Marissa countered, her voice firm. Their mother's instability and relapse have caused significant emotional distress. Mia and Jayden have witnessed behavior that no child should have to see. These children need a stable home, and they need it now. Daniels glanced over at Mia and Jayden. Mia had her head down, but Jayden was staring at the back of the courtroom, looking at nothing in particular. Daniels reached out and gently placed his hand on Jayden's shoulder, offering him what little comfort he could. The back and forth continued, but Daniels wasn't listening anymore. His mind was focused on the kids. What if this doesn't work? What if the judge sides with Michelle? The thought gnawed at him like a persistent itch. He had to stay hopeful, but doubt crept in, threatening to overwhelm him. After what felt like an eternity, the judge called a recess. Daniels, feeling his heart in his throat, stood up from the table and motioned for Mia and Jayden to follow him. You guys okay? He asked softly. Jayden finally looked up, his face full of confusion. Will we be with you soon? Or, do we have to go back with Mom? Daniels knelt in front of them, his eyes filled with a quiet promise. I'm doing everything I can to make sure you're safe. No matter what, you're not going anywhere without me. Mia blinked up at him, her voice small but strong. You won't leave us? Daniels shook his head, his chest tight. I'm not going anywhere, Mia. I'll always be here. She nodded, her small hand reaching out to grasp his. The recess ended, and the courtroom resumed. Daniels took his seat, his heart pounding as the judge returned. After a few more minutes of deliberation, Judge Nelson finally spoke. I have reviewed the evidence, and I have listened to both sides. Based on the information provided, I am granting temporary emergency custody to Officer Daniels, effective immediately. I will order a full evaluation of Michelle Brown's ability to care for her children. Daniels exhaled, his entire body releasing the tension he hadn't realized he was holding. Mia and Jayden would be with him. For now, they were safe. But the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning. The morning sun shone brightly through the blinds, casting long shadows across the small living room of Daniel's apartment. It had been 2 weeks since the court granted him temporary custody of Mia and Jaden, and though the kids were adjusting, every day felt like a challenge. Daniels had thought that taking them in would be the hard part, the paperwork, the legal fight, the tense court hearings, but he was beginning to understand that the real challenge was what came after. Mia sat at the kitchen table, her legs dangling as she colored quietly in her notebook. Bunny, her ever-present companion, was nestled by her side. Jaden was on the couch, staring at the TV but clearly lost in his own thoughts. Daniels couldn't help but notice the change in their behavior since they'd been with him. There was a heaviness to their eyes, a guardedness that wasn't there before. It was like they were trying to get used to a new world, one where they didn't have to be afraid. But the silence that filled the apartment wasn't exactly peaceful. It was filled with unspoken questions, with the echoes of a life they'd left behind. Daniels was busy in the kitchen when the phone rang. He saw the caller ID and felt a pang of apprehension. Michelle. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello. Daniels, Michelle's voice crackled through the line, and he could hear the rawness in her tone. I want my kids back. Daniels' stomach tightened. He had known this was coming, but hearing it from Michelle's lips made the reality hit home. She was going to fight for them, hard. I'm sorry, Michelle, Daniels said, his voice firm but not unkind. The court made its decision, and right now, the kids are with me. I'm trying to do what's best for them. You don't know what's best for them, she snapped, her voice rising with a mixture of anger and desperation. You think you can just waltz in and take my kids like they're some kind of project? They belong with me, Daniels. Daniels exhaled slowly, trying to keep his calm. He had heard this before. Michelle's frustration and guilt were spilling over, and he knew it wasn't the first time she'd felt this way. But her anger wasn't just about him taking the kids, it was about her feeling like she had lost control. Michelle, I understand you're upset, he said, his voice softer now, trying to meet her where she was. But this isn't about me. This is about the kids. They need stability. They need to feel safe. And right now, they're not getting that with you. You don't get to make that decision. Michelle's voice cracked, and for a moment, Daniels could hear the vulnerability underneath her anger. I'm their mother. I can do better. I just need time, that's all. You have no right to take them from me. Daniels closed his eyes for a moment. He could feel the weight of her words, but he knew what he had to do. He couldn't give up on them now. I'm not trying to take them from you, Michelle. But they're here with me for a reason. The court decided that it's best for them right now. The line went quiet for a moment, and Daniels knew she was processing what he had said. But then she spoke again, her voice sharp. You're going to regret this. I swear you will. Don't think I'm going to just let you walk away with my kids. Daniels sighed, running a hand through his hair. Michelle, I don't want to fight with you. But if you want to get them back, you need to show that you're ready. And I'm not talking about just saying it. You need to prove it. I will, she spat back. Just wait. Before Daniels could respond, the line went dead. He hung up the phone and leaned against the counter, his mind racing. Michelle wasn't going to make this easy. He knew that much. But he had made a promise to Mia and Jaden, and he wasn't going to break it. No matter what. He turned around to see Mia watching him from the kitchen table, her big eyes filled with worry. Is everything okay, Mr. Daniels? She asked softly, her voice filled with the vulnerability of a child who had been through too much already. Daniels smiled at her, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, Mia. Everything's fine. Just some things we need to work out, okay? She nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. Are we going to stay with you? Daniel's heart ached. He knelt down next to her and took her small hand in his. For as long as you need, Mia. You and Jaden are safe here. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. She gave him a tentative smile, but it was clear that the uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. As the days passed, Daniels continued to settle into the new routine with Mia and Jaden. But the peace he'd hoped for didn't last long. The reality of raising two kids, dealing with their trauma, and trying to navigate a custody battle was taking its toll on him. He tried to make their days as normal as possible. He took them to the park, helped them with their homework, and even made pancakes on Sunday mornings. Little by little, he saw glimmers of the kids that Mia and Jaden could become, kids who would laugh, who would play, who would feel safe. But every night, when the house grew quiet, Daniels felt the weight of everything that was still hanging in the balance. He was doing his best to be a father to them, but the future was still uncertain. Michelle wasn't going to give up easily, and he had to be prepared for whatever came next. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Daniels sat at the kitchen table with his phone in hand. He stared at the screen for a moment, then dialed Rivera's number. Daniels, Rivera's voice came through the phone, low and serious. "How's it going with the kids?" It's going," Daniels said with a sigh. "I'm doing what I can, but Michelle's not making this easy. She's already talking about fighting me for custody. I don't know if I can keep doing this." "Daniels," Rivera said, her voice full of concern, "you're not doing this alone. I'm with you, every step of the way. We're going to make sure Mia and Jaden are safe." He felt a surge of gratitude for her support. She had been his anchor throughout this whole ordeal. "I know. I just don't know how much longer I can keep going like this." "You don't have to do it alone," Rivera replied softly. "We'll get through it. Just keep doing what you're doing." As Daniels hung up the phone, he glanced at the doorway, where the soft sounds of Mia and Jaden's breathing could be heard from their rooms. He couldn't give up on them. He had to keep fighting, not just for their safety, but for the future they deserved. The week had been a blur. Daniels had been juggling work, the kids, and the ongoing legal battle, and each day felt like it dragged on longer than the last. He had gotten used to the routine, though he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was looming, something just out of reach, waiting to surface. The unease had settled into his bones, a constant, gnawing sensation that wouldn't go away. It was a Thursday morning when he received the call. He had just finished getting Mia and Jaden ready for school and was sipping his coffee, preparing himself for another busy day. He picked up his phone without thinking, but when he saw the caller ID, his heart skipped a beat. It was Marissa Fields, his lawyer. "Daniels," Marissa's voice came through the phone, sharp and urgent. "We need to talk. I've got some news, and it's not good." Daniels immediately felt his stomach tighten. "What happened?" "There's been a development," she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "It's about Michelle. She's filed a counterclaim for full custody, and she's got something new to back it up." Daniels felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. A counterclaim? He had expected Michelle to fight for custody, but this was a whole new level of complexity. "What do you mean, something new?" Daniels asked, his voice edging on panic. What could she possibly have that would change the situation? "There's a report from her rehab center," Marissa explained. "Michelle has been clean for 6 months, and she's been in therapy. It seems she's made significant progress. She's using that as her primary argument for regaining custody." Daniel's mind raced. 6 months. How had this slipped under his radar? "Are you telling me she's been sober the entire time we've had the kids?" Daniels asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marissa paused before answering. "It's possible. I'm still looking into the details, but the report looks legitimate." "This complicates things, Daniels. If Michelle can prove she's stable, the court may consider giving her full custody again." Daniels clenched his jaw, trying to hold back the rising frustration. How could she have hidden this from me? He had no idea Michelle was making such progress. All he'd seen was her struggle, her inability to stay clean, the dangerous environment she'd created for Mia and Jaden. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath, rubbing his temples. Listen, we still have a chance, Marissa said, her voice firm. We need to prepare ourselves. This is going to be a tougher fight than we anticipated. I'll work with the court to get a full evaluation of Michelle's progress, but we have to be ready for anything. Daniels nodded, though he didn't feel reassured. I understand. What do I do now? Keep doing what you've been doing. Stay the course. We'll gather more information and see where this leads. Just don't get discouraged. The kids are doing well, right? Daniels glanced over at the kids, who were eating breakfast at the kitchen table. Mia had Bunny sitting beside her, tracing shapes in her cereal, while Jaden was focused on a puzzle. They're doing better than before, Daniels said, the weight of his words hitting him hard. But I don't know how much longer I can keep this up if Michelle's going to keep throwing these curveballs. You're not alone in this, Daniels, Marissa reminded him. We'll fight this. And we'll win. He didn't feel so sure about that, but he wasn't ready to give up either. Not yet. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and tense conversations with his lawyer. By the time Daniels picked up Mia and Jaden from school, his mind was consumed with the thought of Michelle's counterclaim. He had barely been able to focus on work, and now he was supposed to act normal in front of the kids. As they walked to the car, Daniels noticed that Jaden was unusually quiet. Normally, Jaden was full of questions, but today, he was distant, his eyes downcast. Mia was quieter than usual as well, and she kept glancing up at him as if she was waiting for him to say something, anything, to make it better. What's wrong, buddy? Daniels asked, crouching down to Jaden's level as they reached the car. Jaden shrugged, his eyes fixed on the ground. Nothing. You sure? Daniels asked gently. You've been really quiet today. Jaden didn't respond, but Daniels could feel the tension in the air. Something was bothering him. Something was off. Mia, sensing the moment, stepped forward and spoke softly. Mr. Daniels, are we really going to stay with you forever? Daniels' heart sank. He had been expecting this question sooner or later, but it still caught him off guard. He had been so focused on the legal fight, on keeping them safe, that he hadn't stopped to really think about how it all felt from their perspective. He kneeled down so he could look her in the eye. Mia. I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you or Jaden. You're safe here. I promise. She looked at him with those big, trusting eyes. But if Mommy wants us back, will we go with her? Daniels took a deep breath, the weight of the question pressing down on him. He had to be honest, but he also had to protect them from the full weight of the truth. I'm doing everything I can to make sure you're safe. And right now, you're safe with me. That's all I can promise, he said, his voice steady, even though his heart was breaking inside. Jaden didn't speak, but he seemed to accept the answer, nodding slowly. Mia, on the other hand, seemed less convinced, and Daniels couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Daniels sat in the living room, his mind racing. He had been prepared for a fight, but now, with Michelle's counterclaim and the new evidence she was presenting, the odds felt stacked against him. He knew he couldn't lose Mia and Jaden. They had come to depend on him, and he had come to depend on them. But what if Michelle had really changed? What if she had turned her life around like she claimed? The thought nagged at him, twisting in his gut. He had seen the depths of her addiction, the lies, the betrayal. But could he really ignore the possibility that she was finally doing the right thing? The next few days were a whirlwind of legal meetings, court hearings, and tense discussions with Marissa. Michelle had come out swinging with everything she had, the rehab report, her therapist's glowing letters, and even testimony from people in her life who swore she had changed. It was enough to make anyone question the truth. Daniels couldn't help but feel the weight of it all bearing down on him. Michelle wasn't just fighting for her kids. She was fighting for her identity, for the chance to prove that she wasn't the person her past had painted her to be. But how could he ignore what he'd seen? The destruction, the broken promises, the times Mia and Jaden had been caught in the crossfire. Yet, as the days went by, Daniels found himself questioning his own motives. Was he standing in the way of Michelle's redemption? Was he denying the kids the chance to reconnect with their mother, even if it meant taking a step into the unknown? It wasn't until a conversation with Rivera, his partner and closest confidant, that he was able to articulate the confusion swirling in his mind. It was a late evening when Daniels met Rivera for a quiet dinner at a local diner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the low hum of conversations filled the air, but Daniels barely noticed any of it. His mind was a maze of thoughts, all tangled together, none of them leading to a clear answer. "So," Rivera started, her voice laced with concern as she stirred her coffee. "How's everything going with the kids? How are they holding up?" Daniels leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. "They're doing okay, better than I expected, I guess. But Michelle is making this harder than I thought. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing anymore. What if she really has changed, Rivera?" "You're asking yourself that now?" Rivera raised an eyebrow. "You've been the one standing up for them, doing everything to give them a chance at a better life. Now you're wondering if she's suddenly the answer." "Daniels, this isn't about whether Michelle's changed, it's about whether she can provide the stability and love they need after everything they've been through. Can she? Do you really believe that?" Daniels stared at his cup of coffee, his fingers tracing the rim. "I don't know. She says she's sober now. She says she's been in therapy. Maybe she's telling the truth. Maybe she's not the same person she used to be." Rivera shook her head. "You know Michelle better than anyone. And you also know how easy it is to lie when the stakes are this high. You have to think about the kids, Daniels. They're counting on you to make sure they're safe. You can't second-guess yourself now." Daniels stared at the table, his mind spinning. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm taking them away from her when they need her the most?" "You're not taking them away," Rivera said softly, her voice calm but firm. "You're protecting them. And you're giving them the chance to heal in an environment where they can actually grow and feel safe. What Michelle's doing, right now, isn't about Mia and Jaden. It's about her. And if you let her back in, the kids might suffer for it again." Daniels sighed deeply. "I know you're right. But the whole thing feels like a tug-of-war, and I'm in the middle of it. I just want them to be happy, Rivera. I want them to have a life without fear." "And they will," Rivera said, reaching across the table and placing her hand over his. "You're doing the best thing for them. And as much as you might doubt it, you have to trust that you're the right person to give them that life. Trust yourself." Daniels nodded slowly, feeling a bit of the weight lift off his chest. "I'm trying. But it's not easy." "It never is," Rivera replied, squeezing his hand. "But that's why you have to keep pushing. For them. For Mia and Jaden." The next day, Daniels found himself standing in front of the courthouse again, this time for another round of hearings. He had spent the morning reviewing the court documents, trying to find any legal argument he could use to hold his ground. But the more he read, the more he felt the walls closing in on him. Michelle had hired a new attorney, someone who seemed to know exactly how to play the game. The attorney was skilled, articulate, and relentless, everything Daniels wasn't. They had started questioning his ability to provide a stable environment for the kids. They painted him as an overworked, overwhelmed man who was simply trying to take the kids from their mother, rather than help them. Daniel's heart was racing as he walked into the courtroom, but as soon as he took a seat and saw Mia and Jaden sitting quietly with his lawyer, he felt the calmness wash over him. They were why he was fighting. For their futures. For their peace of mind. As the proceedings began, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Michelle's lawyer presented evidence of Michelle's rehabilitation, photos of her attending therapy, letters from the rehab center, and character references from friends who said she had turned a corner. Daniels could feel the pressure mounting. The court was beginning to lean in Michelle's favor, and he couldn't ignore the cold reality settling in his gut. What if she won? What would happen to Mia and Jayden then? Marissa was up next. She countered the testimony with evidence of her own, documents showing Michelle's history of relapse, failed promises, and the effect her addiction had on Mia and Jayden's well-being. But even as she spoke, Daniels could sense the hesitation in her voice. This battle was far from over, and it wasn't going to be easy. The tension in the room was palpable, but Daniels stayed focused on one thing: Mia and Jayden's faces. He had to stay strong for them. He couldn't let them go back into a life of uncertainty, a life filled with chaos and fear. They had been through enough. That evening, after the court session ended, Daniels returned to the apartment and found the kids sitting on the couch, watching a movie. Mia looked up at him, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Did the judge decide yet?" she asked, her voice soft. Daniels hesitated before sitting down beside her. "Not yet, sweetie. But I'll make sure you're okay. No matter what happens." She nodded, but there was a worry in her eyes, one he couldn't ignore. "Mr. Daniels," she said quietly. "I'm scared." Daniels' heart twisted. "I know, Mia. I'm scared too. But we're going to get through this. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere." The weeks leading up to the final court hearing felt like they had stretched into months. Daniels had been running on fumes, barely finding time to eat or sleep between legal meetings, work, and taking care of Mia and Jayden. The stress of the custody battle had taken its toll on him, but he pushed through it, determined to be there for the kids no matter what. But as the days grew shorter and the final hearing loomed, Daniels found himself facing a new kind of fear. What if he lost? What if he couldn't keep Mia and Jayden safe and secure in the life they had built with him? The thought gnawed at him constantly, keeping him up at night, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. He had told himself that he wasn't afraid of losing, that he could handle whatever came his way. But this was different. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was the battle for the children he had come to love as his own. He had watched them grow, heal, and thrive under his care, and he couldn't imagine a world where they weren't part of his life. Mia's question from a few days ago echoed in his mind: "Are we really going to stay with you forever?" It was a simple question, but it carried so much weight. She was scared. Jayden was scared. And no matter how hard he tried to reassure them, he knew that the uncertainty was eating away at them, just as it was eating away at him. That evening, as Daniels sat at the kitchen table, going over notes for the final hearing, he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find Mia standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with worry. "Mr. Daniels," she asked hesitantly. "Can we talk?" Daniels set the papers down and gave her his full attention, trying to hide the exhaustion in his voice. "Of course, Mia. What's on your mind?" She walked into the room and sat down beside him, wringing her hands nervously. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About Mommy." Daniel's heart sank at the mention of Michelle. He knew this was coming, the tug-of-war between her love for her mother and the loyalty she felt toward him. "What have you been thinking about her?" Daniels asked gently, his voice steady. Mia hesitated for a moment, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if she really is better now? What if she really wants to be our mom again? I don't want her to be sad. And I don't want you to be sad either." Daniels took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Mia, listen to me," he said softly, placing a hand on hers. "I don't want anyone to be sad either. And I know this is hard. But what I'm doing, what I've been doing, is making sure that you and Jayden have a safe and happy home. That's all that matters right now. You deserve that, Mia. You deserve a place where you don't have to worry about anything except being a kid." Mia's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "But, what if we're not allowed to stay with you anymore? What if we have to go back to Mommy?" Daniels felt a sharp pang in his chest. He hated that he couldn't promise her everything would be okay, but he wasn't going to lie to her either. "I'll fight for you," Daniels said, his voice unwavering. "I'll fight for you and Jaden. I'm not going to let anyone take you away from here unless it's what's best for you. And I will make sure that no one takes you away unless they know for sure that it's what you both need." Mia nodded, though her face was still clouded with doubt. "I know you'll fight for us. But I'm scared." Daniels pulled her into a hug, holding her close. He wished he could shield her from all the pain and confusion, but he knew that wasn't possible. All he could do was keep fighting, keep being the rock she needed, and hope that it was enough. The days leading up to the final court hearing felt like an eternity. Daniels spent every free moment he had preparing for the hearing, going over documents, reading reports, and rehearsing his statements. The pressure was mounting, but he couldn't afford to let it overwhelm him. He had to remain focused. He had to do this for the kids. On the morning of the final hearing, Daniels woke up early, his mind already racing with possibilities. As he walked into the kitchen to make breakfast for Mia and Jaden, he found them sitting at the table, their backpacks packed and ready for school. But they weren't their usual selves. Both of them were quiet, their eyes distant as they stared down at their cereal. Daniels set the frying pan down and walked over to them. "You guys okay?" Mia looked up at him with wide eyes, her voice trembling. "Mr. Daniels, is today the day?" Daniels nodded slowly, his heart heavy. "Yeah. It's today." Jaden didn't speak, but Daniels could see the fear in his eyes. He sat down next to them, trying to offer a sense of calm. "You know, no matter what happens, I'm here for you, right?" he said, his voice steady, though the uncertainty inside him threatened to crack. "You don't have to worry about anything. We're in this together." Mia nodded, though her gaze lingered on her bowl of cereal, and Jaden still said nothing. The silence between them felt heavy, and Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. As the time for the hearing drew closer, Daniels and Marissa made their way to the courthouse, the weight of the day bearing down on them. Marissa had gone over everything once more, their arguments, their evidence, the chances of winning. But no matter how many times she reassured him, Daniels couldn't quiet the storm inside his mind. When they finally entered the courtroom, the familiar sights of the sterile, quiet room felt suffocating. The opposing lawyer was already seated, looking over papers with an air of confidence. Michelle was there too, sitting with her lawyer, her expression one of determination. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Daniel's heart raced as he took his seat, trying to remain calm. The arguments went back and forth, each side presenting its case with fervor. The court was quiet, the air thick with tension. Finally, it was Daniel's turn to speak. He stood up, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "Your Honor, I've spent the last several months doing everything in my power to make sure these kids are safe. I've loved them as my own. And no matter what happens today, I will continue to fight for them. I'm not just a man standing in the way of their mother, I'm a man who wants nothing more than for them to have a stable, loving life." His words hung in the air as he returned to his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spoken from the heart, and now all he could do was wait. The judge called for a recess, and as Daniel sat back down, he saw Mia and Jaden in the hallway, looking at him with a mixture of hope and fear in their eyes. They were waiting for the outcome just as much as he was. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as the judge returned from recess. Daniel sat in his seat, trying his best to keep his mind focused, but his thoughts kept drifting to Mia and Jaden. They were sitting just outside the courtroom, anxiously waiting, just like him. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, and the pit in his stomach grew deeper with every moment. Across the room, Michelle was talking to her lawyer in low tones, her gaze flicking toward Daniels every now and then, her face a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. She had fought tooth and nail for this moment, and now it was out of her hands. The battle had been long and painful, but it was nearing its end. Daniels couldn't help but wonder what the judge was thinking. What would be best for the kids? Was he doing the right thing? He had fought so hard, not just for custody, but for their future. For the chance to give them a better life than the one Michelle had once offered them. But no matter how sure he'd been in his heart, the reality of the decision weighed heavily on him now. The gavel struck, and the courtroom went silent. "Court is back in session," the judge's voice echoed in the otherwise still room. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case, and after careful consideration, I am ready to make my ruling." Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he sat forward in his seat. His heart thudded loudly in his chest, and he could feel the heat of the moment. This was it. The judge looked from Michelle's lawyer to Marissa and finally settled his gaze on Daniels. "Officer Daniels," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "I've listened carefully to the testimony presented here, and I must consider what is in the best interests of Mia and Jaden. This is not an easy decision, but it is one that I believe will help these children find the stability they deserve." Daniels clenched his hands in his lap, trying to keep himself together. His mind raced with thoughts of the kids. Would they stay with him? Would they go back to Michelle? The judge paused for a moment, and Daniels could see Michelle's face twitch with anxiety. She was holding her breath, waiting for the decision just as much as he was. For a brief moment, Daniels wondered if maybe this was the hardest part for her too, the not knowing. Finally, the judge spoke. "Based on the evidence, the history of the parents, and the best interests of the children, this court has decided that Mia and Jaden will remain in the custody of Officer Daniels." For a split second, Daniels couldn't process the words. He blinked, his brain racing to catch up with what he had just heard. The words were a blur, but then they hit him like a wave. They were staying with him. His hands shook, his eyes were wide, and for a moment, he just sat there, stunned. The room was silent except for the sound of the gavel as it struck again, sealing the decision. Across the room, Michelle's face went pale. Her eyes flicked to the judge, then to Daniels, and back again. For a moment, she just stared. There were no words, no outbursts, just a quiet realization that this was the end of her battle for now. The tears that welled up in her eyes were a mix of anger, sorrow, and regret. Daniels didn't know what to feel. He knew he had won, but this wasn't a victory that felt good. He wasn't celebrating. He was simply trying to process the enormity of it all. As the judge finished the ruling, he turned to Daniels. "I strongly recommend continued therapy and support for both parents to ensure that the children's emotional and physical needs are met. This ruling is not permanent, and the situation will be reassessed in the future. However, for now, Mia and Jaden will remain in your care, Officer Daniels." Daniels nodded, though his mind was spinning. It wasn't over. It never really would be. There would always be a chance that Michelle could come back, could fight again. But for now, he had won. And for now, Mia and Jaden were safe with him. The courtroom emptied slowly, but Daniels couldn't move. He just sat there, staring at the papers in front of him, trying to make sense of everything. Marissa came over to him, her face a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it," she said softly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You really did it." Daniels finally exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening. He was so tired. So tired. But there was also a weight lifting off his shoulders. The weight of the unknown had been crushing him, and now, it was gone. For now. As Daniels stepped outside the courthouse, he saw Mia and Jaden waiting by the entrance. They were standing together, their little hands clasped, their faces full of uncertainty. When they saw him, their eyes lit up. Daniels knelt down in front of them, his heart racing again. He couldn't keep the tears back as he looked at their innocent faces, their eyes full of hope. "Mia. Jaden," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You guys are staying with me. It's official. You're safe here." Mia's face broke into a tentative smile, and Jaden immediately ran to him, wrapping his arms around his neck. Daniels held him tight, feeling the weight of everything in that moment, the pain, the relief, the love. Mia took a few cautious steps toward him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. "Are you sure, Mr. Daniels?" she asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Daniels smiled through the tears, brushing her hair back from her face. "I'm sure, Mia. I'm sure." Later that evening, Daniels sat on the couch with Mia and Jaden, their heads resting against him as they watched a movie together. The weight of the day was still on him, but it felt different now. The future was uncertain, but in this moment, they were together, and that was all that mattered. "Mr. Daniels," Mia said softly, looking up at him. "Thank you." Daniels smiled, his heart swelling with pride and love. "Thank you, Mia," he whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." Jaden shifted next to him, his small hand resting in Daniels as he looked up. "We're home, right?" he asked, his voice filled with quiet certainty. Daniels squeezed his hand. "Yeah, Jaden. We're home." The weeks after the court ruling passed in Daniels' favor felt like a dream. The constant worry that had plagued him for months was gone, replaced by a calmness he hadn't known in years. Mia and Jaden were safe. They were home, and for now, that was all that mattered. But even though the legal battle had ended, Daniels knew that the real work was just beginning. Each day, he watched Mia and Jaden grow more comfortable with the stability they now had. Mia, who had always been cautious and reserved, began to show her true self. She was starting to laugh more, her bright smile returning as she felt secure in the life they were building together. Jaden, who had always been the quieter of the two, began to open up more, his playful side coming out in unexpected bursts of energy. It wasn't perfect. There were still rough days, days when the past crept in and threatened to take hold. But they were facing it together, as a family. The kids still had moments where they longed for their mother, moments when they asked why things couldn't go back to the way they were. Daniels didn't have easy answers for those questions. All he could do was assure them that he would always be there, no matter what. One afternoon, as Daniels sat in the living room, going over some paperwork for his job, Mia and Jaden burst through the door, their laughter filling the house. Daniels looked up from his desk and smiled as they ran toward him. "Guess what, Mr. Daniels?" Mia asked, her eyes shining with excitement. "What is it?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Jaden held up a small, crumpled piece of paper. "We made this for you," he said proudly, his voice full of excitement. Daniels took the paper from his hand, unfolding it to reveal a simple drawing, a picture of a house, a tree, and 3 stick figures standing in front of it. One of the figures was Mia, the other was Jaden, and the third was Daniels. They were all holding hands. It wasn't much, just a child's drawing, but to Daniels, it meant everything. "Wow, this is amazing," Daniels said, his voice thick with emotion. "You guys did this for me?" "Yep," Mia said, her smile widening. "We wanted you to know that we're happy. Really happy. We feel safe here with you." Jaden nodded in agreement, his small hand clutching Daniels' arm. "We like it here," he said simply, but his words were loaded with meaning. Daniels swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. For so long, he had worried that he wouldn't be enough for them, that they would never truly feel at home with him. But now, in this moment, he realized that he had been enough all along. "I'm glad you're happy," he said softly. "You two are the best thing that's ever happened to me." Mia and Jaden beamed, their faces full of joy, and for the first time in a long while, Daniels allowed himself to feel the peace that had been eluding him. They had come so far together, and no matter what came next, they were ready to face it, together. Later that evening, after dinner, Daniels found himself sitting on the back porch, watching the sun set. Mia and Jaden were playing in the backyard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It was a peaceful moment, the kind that Daniels had longed for when he had first taken on the responsibility of caring for them. As he sat there, watching them, he couldn't help but think back to the moment when everything had changed, the day they had asked him for help. It seemed like so long ago, but it felt like it had happened just yesterday. Back then, he had been just a cop, a man doing his job. But now, he was a father, a protector, a man who would do anything to keep his children safe. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be bumps along the way. There would be challenges, both big and small. But as he looked at the two kids he had come to love as his own, he knew that he was ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Daniels had learned so much over the past year, about family, about love, about what it truly meant to be there for someone. He had learned that family wasn't just about blood. It was about commitment, about showing up, about being there when it mattered most. And that was something he would never take for granted. The sound of footsteps broke him from his thoughts. He turned to see Mia and Jaden standing at the back door, looking at him with wide, expectant eyes. "Mr. Daniels," Mia said, her voice shy but sure. "We were wondering, when do we get to go to the park again?" Daniels smiled, his heart light. "How about tomorrow?" he said, standing up and ruffling their hair. "We can go first thing in the morning." Both of their faces lit up, and they ran to him, each of them grabbing one of his hands as they led him toward the door. The sound of their laughter filled the air, and Daniels couldn't help but smile. It was moments like these that made it all worth it. Moments like these that reminded him that, no matter how difficult things had been or would continue to be, the love they shared as a family would always be stronger. As they sat on the porch that night, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the sky, Daniels realized that the journey they had started together was far from over. There would be new challenges, new struggles, but also new triumphs. And through it all, they would have each other. And that, he realized, was enough. For Mia and Jaden, and for himself, the future was full of possibilities. It was a new beginning, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?